Yeah. And now I'd like to talk about my bag. I just bought this bag and it's incredible. It's upside down, but it's got Bitcoin, Litecoin, some kind of diamond-shaped logo I'm not familiar with. Maybe some of you have heard of it. But this bag, which also has a laptop sleeve inside, it folds in half, looks great on your arm. This is the world's first bag that's on the blockchain. I was included a QR code with a unique identifier for this bag. Here it is. I'm not going to show it because I don't want you to steal my bag. But this is a cryptographically owned and proven bag. I'll soon be registering it. And if you want to steal it, you'll have to steal my key and transfer ownership of this bag on the blockchain. So check that out, the Bitcoin bag, only sold here at Paralindsay Polis. But now we have a new guest who needs no introduction, but we'll introduce him anyway. Peter Todd. Oh, nobody claps for me. So thanks, Peter, everyone. My brother from another mother, we're twins as we discussed last night. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Be sure to talk really close to the microphone and talk really loud so you can out-project even me.
I'll do what I can.
All right. So we've got Peter Todd, the contrarian. Let's start with the hardest questions first. Let's go right to it. We were both at JJ's presentation at the Breaking Bitcoin conference in Paris. And as you all know, JJ won the conference. He broke Bitcoin. He did it on stage. He wasn't supposed to. He told the organizers he wouldn't. Elizabeth Stark asked him questions before you. She was very physically and verbally upset. She was mad. She's one of the organizers and she felt lied to. But JJ overloaded a node by sending it too much traffic, filling its RAM. The node crashed. This could crash many other nodes. He kind of said 3 out of the 4 implementations had a fix. Fix hadn't been deployed yet. And I think you started asking him about industry standards. So what are the industry standards for disclosing vulnerabilities? What should JJ have done? What did he do?
Well, you know, I think actually the industry standards aren't necessarily the interesting thing there.
Right.
Like, what I kind of asked JJ was essentially, you know, going through, I mean, who did you disclose it to? You know, when you went and told people, I will go disclose it later, I will give you time to fix it, et cetera, et cetera. You know, obviously you're setting a precedent. I mean, you're saying, well, I will go work with you to get it fixed out. And so that when I do disclose, which, you know, should happen at some point, the network isn't vulnerable. Now, what JJ didn't seem to know was that Bitcoin Core was already aware of that problem and had already, I mean, the reason why we rewrote that database was to fix that issue. So that was all well in the process. And his timing was a bit interesting because it was right before he knew that version 15, which had the fix, would get released.
Version 15, which also knocked all the SegWit 2x nodes off the network until another questionable thing happened.
We should get into that as well, because that's not quite an accurate way to put it. But, you know, so from the point of view of JJ, I mean, for him to do that disclosure in that way, it's very obviously political. You know,
he did get to a bit of a pitch at the end of the speech. He said we shouldn't have a centralized Blockstream core development team. Sorry, I said it wrong. Bitcoin core development team. Everyone gets mad if I say it wrong. But yeah, he said no centralized. He wanted 4 or 5 teams working on it. He seems to think that's the current better model. What would you think about that?
The fact that multiple of those decentralized teams that do exist were vulnerable to this same problem goes to show that, you know, re-implementing stuff is not a magical fix. And in fact, the nature of consensus systems is a consensus system only works if it's in consensus. You know, if there are questions about whether or not the network is in consensus, are you going to accept Bitcoins? Of course not. You'd be crazy. You know, this is why on Ethereum, which does have multiple implementations, every time that there's a consensus failure, the first thing that exchanges do is hit that big red button and immediately shut everything down. You know, and I'm sorry, but that's not a scenario where having multiple implementations made something more reliable. It makes it less reliable because there's more, you know, more ways that it can go fail. Similarly, even if you try to run multiple ones at the same time, you know, try to average them out or something, well, I'm going to pick a different set of consensus systems than you will. And so my one will fail in different ways than your system will. Which means that from the point of view of the guys trying to fix it, now they have, you know, n² more possible
problems,
possible ways this can all fail. You know, so I'm sorry, but the reality is, for the type of system that Bitcoin is, adding that kind of redundancy does not help. You know, and this is seen in experience elsewhere. You know, we have NASA software standards where they try to do this exact same concept, multiple implementations, to go and say control the flight software,
right,
say shuttle or something.
Sure.
And the reality is, even in their case where they don't need consensus,
yeah,
they still find that they can't get more reliability to the same extent that they expected.
And this sounds like the same kind of NASA system that sent one of our Mars rovers underground. They didn't convert the units, and the rover did exactly what it was told to do and plummeted into the Earth because of a meters to miles.
Underground is a very nice way to put that. By underground, we should really say it turned into a smear of molten, vaporized metal the moment it hit Mars. In fact, to be exact, what actually happened is it hit the atmosphere and burned up in the atmosphere.
It's going too fast?
Yeah, I mean, even in Mars, it's not a pure vacuum. So when you hit it at that speed, that 1% of Earth's atmosphere...
millions of dollars vaporized,
Yeah, it turned into a shooting star.
Tragic loss.
Yeah. And again, I mean, that's the exact kind of thing. Like, even if you have multiple implementations, they end up making the same mistake. And the process of debugging them just gets harder. Now, what I think the interesting thing about JJ is not that kind of issue. It's more that he lied, and he lied repeatedly. You know, he lied about Bitcoin ABC having a fix. Oh, Bitcoin ABC, I mean, they fixed it, you know, after only a couple days after I announced it.
Sure.
JJ, where did they get that fix? Off Bitcoin Core.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't develop that fix. And I'm sorry, but making that type of claim is lying. You know, the nicest possible thing you can say is it's lying by omission, and that's still a lie.
Sure, it is.
Same thing as he said, B2X, Shift Garsic's implementation had it fixed. No, they hadn't. Again, they got it from Bitcoin Core when they did fix it, and B, they hadn't merged it at that point. Sorry, they just didn't have a fix. You know, and ultimately, it's pretty clear the guy was doing political maneuvering to try to discredit other implementations. Now, the reality is, I mean, I've never bothered running Bitcoin, you know, JJ's implementation, but from what I hear, it doesn't actually work that well. And it uses up a ton of RAM and crashes often. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but...
similar problem to what he was presenting.
Yeah. And I think chances are the only reason we haven't heard more stuff about this is because no one really cared about his implementation. Now that he's set himself up as a pariah, you know, as a target, he'll get a lot of pissed off people probably looking at his code. And given he's not willing to do responsible disclosure, some of those people will probably not for him. Now, I'm sure, like, say, Gregory Maxwell will still responsibly disclose to them. I mean, he's above these kind of issues.
Sure.
But, you know, don't piss off like a world full of hackers.
No, I already felt that just the other day. We had a masked man on. And I'm a little questionable about wearing a mask in public. I'm either a be in private or be in public kind of guy. But I didn't want to piss off that masked man. I know, it's a mystery. Where'd Peter go? But still, they have their thing, and that's what they're into. But the other thing about JJ's presentation is it brought up the possibility of other butterflies, to reference the previous talk, butterflies. And there's other coins that are based on Bitcoin that could have the same vulnerability. And did JJ inform them? Did we even list them? I don't even know where to start, but there are certainly copies of Bitcoin that could be affected by the same thing, right?
We know he didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, and frankly, like within Bitcoin Core, it's a big issue because there's this endless list of coins, and where do you draw the line? You know, and also even disclosing it to other coins is problematic.
They could attack each other. And
and they could attack Bitcoin too if you disclose prematurely. You know, I know with Monero, they recently had a major issue. I believe it allowed you to counterfeit coins, and the way they fixed this was they deployed it first on Monero, got out on the network, and once they were protected, still all in secret, then they told the Monero clones that, you know, they knew of, hey, we fixed this issue, you better fix it as well. You know, here's the deadline. And as far as I know, everyone that they, you know, were able to go through this process with did fix it in time. So,
and now just to compare this to other security vulnerabilities, I know there's in generally software, there's kind of a question: should you tell everyone? How long should you wait? Maybe you told Microsoft, but they won't fix it, so you make a website or something like the Heartbleed bug comes out that's so big they don't know how to fix it. Where do you stand on this? Should people expose vulnerabilities to the public, or should they try to work with the companies?
I mean, I think it's a case-by-case basis. You know, and this is part of why I say the interesting thing about this JJ situation is not the disclosure.
Yeah.
Had JJ gone from the start and said, I'm just going to disclose this immediately, I mean, I might not think in that particular case he did the right thing, but I wouldn't say that in general he'd done the wrong thing.
Because if you disclose it immediately, your goal is obviously to get the fix as soon as possible. Everyone freaks out, they drop what they're doing, they fix it.
Yeah.
The other option is to wait. So JJ waited.
And the main thing is just, you know, be consistent and don't lie to people. If you tell people, I'm going to go wait, you should actually wait. Or at bare minimum, at least ask them before you do a presentation. You know, in some cases, I mean, disclosure right away makes a lot of sense. As an example, when that backdoor was found in Bitmain hardware, the reality is we knew it was backdoor, and I think the people behind that weren't
intentional backdoor, maybe to control the miners, or for people that have a lot of miners, it was a control mechanism. But from the outside, it could also be a control mechanism, right?
In the case of that backdoor, and I was informed about the intention to go and disclose this. And, you know, if I remember correctly, one of the things I said to the people behind this was, well, you know, do we have a way for people to patch this issue? And the reality was yes. It was like a one-line firewall config change, and that would fix it immediately. You know, is this a
easy
perfect
for the
thing?
miners to implement? Their firewall adjusts, and then now you can't control their miners remotely.
You know, so I think in that particular case, I felt comfortable saying, yeah, put up a website and get it disclosed and get people to fix it right away.
Sure.
In the case of this Bitcoin issue, it required a fundamental redesign of how the databases worked. You know, that's why it took many months for Bitcoin Core to get it fixed out, because since no one was saying they were going to disclose it, you might as well go through the testing process and do a good job on this.
And that does seem to be one of the tenets of the Bitcoin Core team, is that they always do the testing and they always take the extra time, because like many have said, it's like fixing an airplane while it's flying. And if you make a mistake, the airplane could go down. And you know, at first it was millions of dollars of people's money, and now maybe it's billions of dollars of people's money. It's the pressure keeps rising and is going to keep rising in the future if the price of Bitcoin keeps going up.
That's absolutely true.
So also at Breaking Bitcoin, you gave a speech, and I only caught the end of it, but it was one of my favorite topics, and it's in my head to go back and watch the live stream later, but I'm just so busy these days going country to country. But you talked about the potential for space aliens to mine Bitcoin, maybe to disrupt the network, maybe just to make some sweet profit in space, maybe some solar panels. Tell us more about your talk.
Well, I mean, where you say space aliens, I think...
they could be humans in space.
Well, let's face it, the most likely type of space alien we're talking about is the type that Trump is building a wall to keep out.
The illegal aliens. So if they give it up and Elon Musk takes them into space, could they mine Bitcoin faster?
Well,
could they send it from Mars?
I mean, that talk, all humor aside, it was really about finding a way to go teach the math behind block propagation, and really how this very counterintuitive thing effect works, where if I'm a miner and my internet connection is slower than the rest of the network, that harms me, usually. Right? Because
now, I've heard some people, I think I talked to you before when we were talking about scaling Bitcoin, when I was really excited, we were talking about the Great Firewall of China, and that if you were behind the network there, it would be like playing Doom or Quake with an advantage. Those servers could run better than the servers on the other side. Is it similar to that in space? Yeah,
so that's absolutely your example, where, I mean, let's suppose we're all in a big Quake death match.
Sure. And I'm going to win.
Yeah. And it's a decentralized Quake deathmatch, so there's no central server.
Right.
And if the majority of the people in our Quake deathmatch are within the same light cone, if you will, within the same low latency area, those people have an advantage over the people who aren't in that area.
Right.
Well, if you go join in and you are in a high, in that particular case, he's not as crazy as you might think, because let's suppose you do have space solar. You know, you have solar panels or something like that up in space collecting power. How do you get the power back down to Earth? Well, one way is you use a bunch of crazy microwaves or lasers or God knows what to get it down.
Yeah.
Or you could just put some Bitcoin miners up there.
Attach them to the solar panels.
Exactly.
Satellites going around.
Yeah, and then you're not beaming the power back, but you're beaming the money back.
Fantastic.
Now, the issue with that then is, well, space is big. If I'm going to put a bunch of solar panels up in space, do I want to do that in Earth's orbit or do I want to do it a bit closer to the sun? Potentially, the way the physics works is maybe I want it really close to the sun to get the maximum amount of sunlight.
Obvious problems aside, heavy gravity, heavy heat.
Well, I mean, and I actually brought this up in my talk, like, all right, how close to the sun might you get? Well, I just looked up on the NASA page, what's the satellite that's closest to the sun, and picked a number saying, let's assume that's true.
Right.
Well, the problem is that, that distance from us to that satellite would be multiple minutes.
Right.
From the speed of light. Well, if one or two miners set up shop there, they're the ones at a disadvantage. But the moment a majority does, suddenly all of Bitcoin flips. And they're the guys, that's where the consensus is. In orbit around the sun, we're not in the consensus.
So the solar Bitcoin miners could essentially take control of the network. But wouldn't we be able to build faster chips here on Earth and maybe take it back? I mean, they'd have to keep launching satellites.
Well, where do you think they got the chips in the first place? Probably Earth.
Probably
Earth.
I
mean, we build faster chips on Earth.
Unless they have a
Someone's going to go buy them and
yeah.
Put them up near the Earth, near the sun.
Someone like Elon Musk has his own rockets, loves space. Maybe Jeff Bezos.
It's just it's a fundamental issue, and I mean, part of my talk had the line in it, which I think a lot of people may took a little too seriously.
Yeah.
The irony of decentralized consensus systems is they have to be centralized to work.
That is very ironic. Yeah.
Now, by centralized, I mean centralized in the same solar system or same planet as you. People tended to take it a little more centralized than that, but it is true. I mean, if you're in consensus, by definition, it means we can communicate in a reasonably fast time.
Sure.
And because the speed of light is fixed, that means we must be relatively close to each other. Now, by relatively, maybe we're talking the same orbit, but if you ask an astronomer, that's pretty close.
Yeah, it's pretty close as opposed to a whole galaxy away or even further.
Yeah.
Well, that was a really interesting talk. And then, so we've survived the Bcash fork. It went off with replay protection, so in that way they did a good thing. It was a solid. Unfortunately, it had the same address space as Bitcoin, so now there's a confusion. You can send your Bcash, you can send your Bitcoin to the same addresses.
Which BitPay is spearheading an effort to fix, by the way.
That's excellent. I mean, what are they going to maybe upgrade Bcash to change the namespace, or what's the fix like?
The fix is pretty simple. They have a new address format, which is exactly the same as old address format, but with version number changed. Okay. So, if I remember correctly, the addresses are going to start with a C, I think. But that's enough to fix the problem.
And if you call them Bitcoin Cash, they're fine with it. But if you call them Bcash, it's a slur. So we'll have to keep working with that. I know. So that one went off fine and it had replay protection. But now, once again, there's another fork on the horizon. The SegWit 2x fork, the New York agreement. They made a deal. They have to stick with it, and they need double the block size, even though the mempool is empty and SegWit transactions are cheaper. So what do you think
for
about
the record,
this?
by the way, I just made a deal to take your bag.
Yeah.
So, deal's done. I've got your bag.
This is a bad deal. What about my blockchain ownership?
Why are you reneging on it? My deal was I take your bag and I'll continue this interview.
Because I didn't agree with this deal.
So?
So this is the same deal with SegWit 2x?
Well, yeah. I also agreed that I'm going to deploy this thing called P2X. Peter's 2x coin.
Right.
All right. And half the coins go to me.
That sounds perfectly fair.
Yeah. Yeah. The other half goes to the miners, and then you guys get nothing.
So you think that the New York agreement is just making up their own rules at this point?
Yeah. And I mean, if I were a miner, I could make up my own rules.
Sure.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. So are you on the page where maybe Bcash was the miners trying to take control of the network, and now we're seeing the corporations try to take control of the network?
Well, probably both this time. I mean, corporations want control. Some corporations, I should add, not all of them.
Sure.
But some want control, and miners, they're willing to share that control. And in my talk earlier today here at HTTP, someone asked me what I thought of B2X, and I went to answer, well, I mean, why don't we put this to the audience? Who's willing to go buy my B2X tokens? And I, suffice to say, got no hands.
No hands, and you were offering a 1-to-1 trade, Bitcoin for B2X?
You know, I should have done like a declining, Dutch auction, declining price, see what the price would be. But I mean, come on. surely I could have sold at least one to some guy once. Hey, I bought Peter Todd's B2X.
They're probably worth more because they were yours.
And even I couldn't get any. And if I were in like Roger Vere's position and I thought B2X was going to be a real thing, surely I'd try to go push this thing by saying, hey, let's actually make a market. Because after all, the Bitfinex price is all well and good, but you got to trust Bitfinex. And we know how well that goes.
The exchange that printed their own debt token and then sold them for like 10 cents on the dollar or something like that? It was a little fishy.
Well, I mean, that's another issue. Although point out, the alternative there was bankruptcy and you'd lose everything. It was essentially
it's a good alternative.
Yeah. But I'm not going to say it was legal, but I will say it wasn't crazy.
At least it worked. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah,
it worked. But yeah.
But I the proof's in the pudding there. I mean, if people aren't willing to go buy a token, then chances are it's not worth much. And more importantly, saying that's Bitcoin when the market has obviously said it's not worth as much as Bitcoin, that's straight up fraud.
And I think you said that in your speech, and we were talking earlier today how Roger said on GitHub that Bitcoin.com would be listing B2X as Bitcoin with the ticker symbol BTC. And just in your talk, I have the quote here, I wrote it down. You said, "I'm sorry to say, but disguising B2X to something else is fraud. It's making fraud possible." I thought that was wonderful.
You said it better than I did.
You have to slow down. It's about the intonation.
It's about the intonation.
That's it.
Yeah, so part of my discussion there was how the fact that it looks like they may be committing fraud on this contributes to their problem of getting developers. If I'm a developer and I'm kind of a pansy who's not really that courageous or anything.
The girl's gone. You could say it. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm just like a little soft-shelled wimp, but I'll go look at the SEC and the FBI and think, do I really want to be doing things that look pretty fraudulent, having my name on it by developing this B2X thing? Maybe I'll just keep working on core. And that is certainly, I don't think, the only reason why there's no B2X developers, but I'm sure it's one of the contributing factors. It's probably fourth or fifth on the list because, we're all courageous, manly men who go ride horsebacks shirtless.
She might watch this later, so yeah, let's pipe.
Yeah. It's like there's just so many things wrong with the B2X project.
And certainly it's worth mentioning Matt Corello, Blue Matt, his letter to the SEC about one of these ETFs. He said the ETF, who, again, there's a lot of questions about these. The Winklevi ETF was making the price, holding the coins, selling the coins. A lot of one hand in the pie here. And what Blue Matt said is he said that he was concerned that the ETF could recognize the other version of Bitcoin, then sell all of their Bitcoin core, buying a bunch of Bitcoin 2X, driving up the price, and suddenly you're holding an ETF ticket that you thought was one Bitcoin, and suddenly it's one B2X or one B Cash or one of these other forks down the line.
Matt Corallo, he got a lot of shit from people for saying that. Oh, you're not a cypherpunk, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry, but that's just common sense consumer protection.
Absolutely.
You can be a cypherpunk as you want, but part of my view of being a cypherpunk is if people choose not to be, I'm okay with that.
Well, I get called a statist all the time. You mentioned consumer protection. One of my idols is Ralph Nader, who brought us seat belts and airbags and consumer protection for a while before the recent administration. We even had a consumer protection agency started under the Obama administration whose task would be to protect consumers from corporations. And I know the libertarians in the audience are saying, let the market decide, let the market decide. Who cares how many babies we serve poisoned milk to? We have to wait till 150,000 of them die and then we'll act on it. But to act before, to try to save those babies or to save people that won't put their seatbelt on or won't pay the extra $1,000 to get airbags, but they could get a sweet stereo. This is a nonsense nanny state thing. But again, that's where I am. I'm a horrible statist. So Peter, you're in the seatbelt category, or what's
speaking as a crazy libertarian, I think if people go choose to buy into a system of consumer protection, great. After all, Bitcoin's consumer protection. I am protected from all those people trying to go steal my private information. For some transactions, that's more important to me than being able to call up my credit card company and say, yeah, I definitely didn't buy that laptop that's sitting on my bed right now. Please reverse the transaction. Sometimes that type of consumer protection works. Other times, that's not consumer protection at all. Bitcoin provides an option that complements the existing system.
So one-way send, once I send my Bitcoin, it's gone. I better have gotten my product for it, otherwise it's gone. Like the PayPal example I brought up earlier, I sold a very small bit on eBay years ago. The guy claimed he was hacked, maybe he was, maybe it was his buddy, and he took my Bitcoin, PayPal took my PayPal money, and I ended up with an empty bag. Which
You weren't
Peter
exactly
took.
protected.
I was not protected by PayPal or eBay. They didn't listen to my side at all. I sent them a one-way transaction. It was gone. I was in the process of transferring my money to my account, but as many people know, PayPal has the power to freeze your money at any time, and they don't really care about your story.
And unfortunately for you, I mean, I heard your little spiel about this bag being protected by the blockchain or something.
The
but,
ownership
you know,
can be verified.
I hate to say this, but that ownership doesn't really translate into the physical world. So when I go walk out that door with your bag, I don't think anyone's going to give a rat's ass that it was recorded on the blockchain.
Fortunately, I have security, and they will scan your card and say, "No, sir."
I
cannot
suspect
have
the number one
blockchain
thing
bag."
that's going to prevent me from walking away with your bag is because I'm saying I'm about to go steal your bag live on the World Crypto
The
Network.
evidence which I will have will be insurmountable.
You know, come to think of it, here you go.
Well, if you gave me my bag back, I have to give you a gift. I'm not sure we're done yet because I want to go back and talk about Jeff Garzik and the 0.15. But while we're giving out gifts, I have a special gift here from CryptoHWWallet.com. I'm sure you have a Trezor wallet at home, maybe in a hidden location or maybe not in your home. But would you like a brown or a black leather case for your Trezor wallet?
I think I'm going to go with black like the future.
Everyone seems to want black. Personally, I chose brown. It's more of a leather color for me. But thank you so much and enjoy that Crypto
Thank
HW
you.
wallet there. But what about Jeff Garzik and the 0.15? So I said it wrong or something. Does 0.15 disconnect these SegWit nodes? Let's start there.
Well, so the thing to remember is that Bitcoin, I guess the way to put it is Bitcoin relies on information being propagated widely. And this is why, for instance, Bitcoin uses Tor to make sure that you can't be censored, to try to get information from your node to their node and their node to your node. Well, one of the simplest ways you screw this up is if every connection you have is to nodes that that aren't on the same currency as you are.
Right.
So if I have a B2X node and all my peers are Bitcoin nodes, the moment B2X becomes a separate currency, I'll be isolated from all the other B2X nodes.
Right.
Equally, if I'm a Bitcoin node and all my peers are B2X nodes, the moment that happens, I'm going to be isolated from my Bitcoin nodes. So making sure that the network topology splits in advance of the actual consensus split is just common sense. We did this on SegWit, where SegWit nodes would only make outgoing connections to other SegWit nodes to ensure that you would definitely have the topology of SegWit nodes ready in advance for when SegWit, was created as a soft fork. Now, a soft fork versus hard fork is slightly different in the exact ways that this network works out. But the principle is still the same. You want to ensure that you're talking to nodes to share your interpretation. In the case of SegWit, the interpretation is more narrow. In the case of B2X, the interpretation is simply incompatible. So, obviously, you actually want B2X nodes to go split off in advance. And because there's definitely going to be some nodes that still connect to both sides of that network are still interconnected. It's just that the primary connections are the correct ones and are safe ones. So really what the B2X team is doing by complaining about this is showing how little they actually understand how networking works in consensus systems. And equally, the Bitcoin audience, and quite frankly, you're an example of this, by describing it that way, you're also showing you don't really fully understand these nuanced issues, which is all right. This is a very subtle issue.
Sure.
It'd take you a few months, first learning about this to realize this, but that's the way the system works.
I'm going to be busy reading that blog that we talked about earlier, so I'm going to need those few months.
So long story short is the description of this being disconnected or kicking them off the network isn't correct.
Okay.
It's changing the network topology to make sure that you have peers that are like-minded.
So Core was about to change the network topology, but then it seems to me like Jeff Garzik put a pull request where they're not going to signal anymore, so now we can't properly identify them, something like that?
Yeah, well, I think this is an example where the intent reveals much more about what they actually did. You know, what that command line thing is just a change to the flags.
Right.
So it shouldn't be a big deal, but they're not doing it in the right way. What they really should do is say, for a subset of B2X nodes, we'll just ensure that they have connections to both sides. And that will be enough to ensure that the two sides that work are definitely interconnected and everything will be fine. Instead, it's all about, well, you're trying to kick this off the network, we're going to bypass all this, and it just gets silly. You know, they're just not talking about the actual issue there, probably because they don't really understand it. You know, and why don't they understand it? Well, because they don't have any devs. I mean, you got Jeff Garzik, who didn't even do like the recent rebase for version 15. Some other unknown guy did it. I mean, Gavin kind of dips his toes in once in a while, but you know, it's nothing compared to the dozens of devs that Bitcoin Core has working every single day, and reviewing things and so on. And it's hard to keep up with that.
So they've had two kind of sneaky moves with the 0.15 thing, and then now Roger with the labeling issue. Let's continue to delve into these conspiracy theories. I didn't want to ask Adam back, but I want to ask you, what do you think about the Blockstream satellites? Because I was talking to some guys, and let's just say they're on the other side of this argument, and they painted a picture to me where Blockstream was kind of this evil company trying to take over all of the Bitcoin transactions and all of the nodes, and that these new satellites that they're renting time on would somehow take over the whole network and control all the nodes. Do you see that happening? Is that possible?
Oh, I mean, I think you completely misunderstood the conspiracy. The real conspiracy is that Blockstream created this free-to-use service that, you know, adds a redundant measure to Bitcoin's networking, so on, purely to go piss Jeff Garzik off. You know, I mean, every day I wake up and think, you know what? I'm going to make the world a better place to make Jeff Garzik unhappy.
And this is, of course, because Jeff Garzik had the Bit satellite idea, made a couple speeches about it, but never actually made it. Now, Blockstream, I think Jimmy Song on our network already set up his satellite dish, is receiving the transactions in a passive way. Then you could send your transactions with SMS. This would work in places like Africa with bad internet. I never saw it taking over the whole network, but I wanted to float their idea there and see what you thought.
I mean, it's just silly to, like, this is like saying, I'm going to go and start up a new ISP, so obviously I'm going to take over the Bitcoin network. Well, no, I'm just providing people more options to get data around. I mean, like as an example, we never actually got around to doing it. Gregory Maxwell and I, we were discussing, you know, it would be really cool to go, like, set up a modem and use the phone line to move blocks around.
Sure.
And that
These are the kind of things you guys think about.
Well,
I got more on that later. I've been to some of your meetings.
And that actually is a potentially useful thing, because the failure modes where the internet goes down and phone lines go down are different.
Sure.
Because that underlying technology is different, and the routing layers end up being a bit different. Not as different as they used to be, but still different.
Right.
So by just having that redundancy, you make it less likely that both will fail at once. Blockstream satellite, frankly, most of the use of this, I mean, the Africa thing is all well and nice, but I think the main thing it really does for Bitcoin is it provides a redundant way of getting block data around to ensure the network stays in consensus. You know, and a good example was actually Puerto Rico, where I was actually just talking to the last conference I was at, someone from Puerto Rico, who remarkably was at that conference, and apparently had spent like the past week without power.
Wow.
And he was telling us how once they did get power back, they found out very quickly that within the island they had networking. You know, the internet was up within the island,
right,
but the links from the island outside were down. But with one Blockstream satellite receiving blocks, that entire island within itself would be in consensus with the rest of the Bitcoin network. And that's a very powerful thing. It just makes Bitcoin that much less likely to go fail for people.
And we could continue to use it during the tragedy. Maybe you could sell relief and supplies, still receive some kind of payment for it, even though the rest of the network's down.
Yeah. And, you know, in some cases it can be even simpler, just to make sure that you realize when censorship happens. You know, you get that extra opportunity. Whereas if you don't, there are attacks you can do. And China is a scary example here, where their Great Firewall of China potentially could separate part or even subsets of the Bitcoin mining community from each other and use that to conduct attacks. But with something like Blockstream Satellite, they will find out very quickly, hang on a second, our internet connection mysteriously isn't giving us that blocks, but the satellite is.
And it would take almost nothing. They just need one satellite to check, and then the rest of their computers could propagate.
And also there is upload bandwidth on the satellite. So while it's not fully there yet, long-term plans apparently are to allow you to upload both blocks and transactions to the satellites from anywhere, in which case they would repropagate this.
Now, how big or how expensive of a satellite rig would you need to send data? Because I've seen the ones they're receiving on, it looks like the old dish network, TV network. That's a one-way, it just comes down, right?
Yeah, my understanding, I could be quite wrong on this, is that it's not that expensive. I mean, we're talking, I believe, on the order of a couple $100 to maybe a few thousand or something, depending on exactly what tech they use. But the big story there is that because Blockstream has reused existing satellite technology rather than launching their own, everything just becomes way cheaper. Jeff Garczyk's thing was use these little Pico satellites with a Bitcoin node running on them, and sure, that makes for great PR, but it doesn't make that much sense.
I saw the presentation. Yes, it was very exciting. I love space. So.
Yeah, it's very romantic, but the practicality is, all right, you've got these little 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter, small satellites up there. Well, they crash back down to Earth pretty quick.
Yeah, you have to keep launching them.
Yeah, they're relatively low. That's an ongoing cost. They're not cheap. Whereas just renting bandwidth that already exists and is getting used less because less people have satellite TV services, for instance.
Sure.
Just makes a lot of sense.
Could take over that whole industry, just buy the satellites.
And for the record, that wasn't Jeff Garczyk's idea. It's a pretty obvious idea. There's satellites. Obviously, you're going to try to use this for communication. The clever thing Blockstream did was really about then coding. And the coding is such that if you're offline for, I believe it's up to 24 hours, they retransmit the blocks using this special encoding that, provided you get 1 day's worth of data, you can extract all those blocks no matter what part of that data set you collect. And I can't even begin to go into the math. It's all black magic to me, but it is magic, and it's very clever stuff. Forward error correction.
Well, it sounds great, and it's the kind of project that these guys are working on. I was going to mention one of the more esoteric things when you're talking about modems and sending the Blockstream over modems. I went to a presentation once at the San Francisco Bitcoin Developers Meetup. I think it was Peter Woolley, maybe Greg Maxwell as well. But they had worked out a system. If you ever read your public key over a telephone and you're writing down the numbers and you screwed them up, they had built a grid of other possible numbers, and they could work out where you'd screwed up. But at the same time, they wouldn't tell you because that'd be an attack vector. What do you think of this kind of work?
Yeah, well, that's what has since become the BEC32 SegWit address standard. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right, it is very clever. In that particular case, the rationale there is, well, first of all, obviously you want very good error detection.
Right.
Ethereum has learned this the hard way, where with Ethereum addresses, if you make a typo, depending on exactly what software stack you are, you can end up easily sending money to the void. That's really, really bad, and tens of thousands of dollars being lost that way.
Sure.
So Bitcoin addresses have always had a strong checksum, and your chance for typo being a valid Bitcoin address is about like 1 in 4 billion.
So when you try to put it in the wallet doesn't go green, it just kind of sits there, and then you say, oh, I typed it wrong, and you fix it instead of sending your money nowhere and not getting it back.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the next step of that is first, Bitcoin addresses use upper and lowercase. So when I try to tell you one over the phone, it's like uppercase A, lowercase B. It's just silly. Yeah. So by removing the case from BEC32, it's easier to say. And then in terms of correcting mistakes, the clever thing about that is it's very good at correcting mistakes. And by having your UI be, here's where the mistake would be, go double check. It ensures that we don't get people to make a mistake, have it auto-corrected, and then they leave the mistake. Because if you leave the mistake, there's probably going to be another mistake made. And once you make enough mistakes, well, now you can no longer correct. So that's actually a UI level thing. It's not so much to protect against attacks, but rather against human error. It's like saying, well, if I had a kid, and my kid made a mistake on a spelling bee. Would I just say, oh, you're close enough, and not tell them where they got it wrong? No.
Spell checkers do exist. I think it's fine.
Yeah, well, you gotta have that feedback process to go and help you improve that source material. I mean, it's why when I use a spell checker, I don't accept the corrections. I go back and actually go correct it. And if you've ever seen my tweets, obviously, I need a lot of work and a lot more practice with my spell checkers.
It can be tough. I really hate the little squiggly lines, but I have to do it. Everyone complains if you misspell something. It's almost as bad as if you mispronounce something, which I do all the time as well. So Peter, is there anything that you're working on right now? I know you're working on the Open Timestamps project. Are there any news on that or anything else that you'd like to tell our audience about while we have them here?
Well, Open Timestamps is kind of an interesting project because I started in 2012, basically as this would be cool to have. And then I learned more about Bitcoin. It's like, Open Timestamps is really boring.
But again, so valuable. Notaries, documents, my friend Chris Ellis, all of these people love to timestamp things.
Yeah, so about a year ago, actually about a year and a half ago, due to a request by my clients, I'd already done a re-implementation so they could re-implement it themselves, and I finally decided, I got to sit down and actually work on this. So I'm now in the position where I've actually got funding to do work on Open Timestamps and polish it and do all that really boring stuff that makes things usable.
So why don't you tell the people what Open Timestamp is and why it's not so boring? Yeah.
Well, you've often heard in Bitcoin, you can go and timestamp things with Bitcoin. You prove when data existed. And the traditional way of doing this is create a transaction output for this. That costs a pile of money. Open Timestamps essentially crowdfunds those transaction outputs in a sense, where everyone who needs a timestamp submits it to a set of calendar servers that then aggregate all those timestamps together, or timestamp requests together, and then do one Bitcoin transaction to timestamp all this stuff. And the other thing it does is it records that information in perpetuity so that you can go back after the fact and actually get your proof linking back to Bitcoin. Long story short, this means if I want to create something that will get timestamped to Bitcoin, I'll be able to know when it was created indefinitely. I can hit a button, and in about a second, I get my reply back. And I know that within a few hours, that'll get timestamped to Bitcoin, and I'll be able to get the proof back later. So this is just all infrastructure to do all this. And it just makes Bitcoin timestamping easy. And the nice thing about it is, because we're aggregating, the cost to do those transactions is sufficiently low. I can certainly cover that with donations indefinitely. I mean, it's really not a big deal.
So where can people timestamp their documents right now? Where can they go to learn more about Open Timestamps?
Quite literally, opentimestamps.org, and there's a little JavaScript thing to timestamp your documents and verify them. And now, as a cypherpunk I am, I'm not going to say it's the most secure thing to verify there, but the timestamping part is every bit as secure as anything else, because it's not Open Timestamps you're trusting, it's Bitcoin.
So what else are you working on? Any new exciting projects? What's coming up next for Peter Todd?
So timestamping is all well and good, but the standard example I give is if I'm timestamping a sale of a house, that doesn't prevent me from simultaneously selling that house to another guy.
Right.
What you need there is uniqueness. You need an anti-double spend. And I'm also working on a library to make it easier to write decentralized applications that deal with anti-double spend. And I generalize this in something I call a single-use seal, which is like, if you've ever seen a shipping container, there are these little seals on the handles that are numbered, and they apply them at one end, and when the shipping container shows up at the other side of the world, they verify the seal is still closed and the numbers match what it should be. And if that's true, what's inside hasn't changed. Well, the digital equivalent to that would be like a signature, but a magical signature they can only sign once. I call that a single-use seal. And when you close it, you get a witness saying, this seal was closed over this data. Well, this sounds like a Bitcoin transaction output, right? It's uniquely numbered.
Yeah.
And when you close it or spend it, you can only do that once. Well, once you build that primitive, you can build anything that needs uniqueness. You can build your token transfer system, you can build your title system. You can build a software repository where, when I go tell you what version of software, what exact binary of software corresponds to a version,
Right.
I can't lie to you and give you a special version that's different from what everyone else got. So there's tons of applications for this. But writing software that takes advantage of these ideas has always been hard, because there's a lot of data marshalling and so on. Mm-hmm. So I'm building something called Proof Marshal, which is all about marshalling proofs. I want to prove something to you. With Proof Marshal, I can figure out what data do I need to give you to prove that thing, and it handles that whole process, and serializing the data, deserializing the data, and so on. Unfortunately, it's about 2 orders of magnitude more complex than open timestamps. Open timestamps you can do in like a weekend.
Sure,
it's a long project. In fact, I started it prior to when I worked at R3 of all things. And
it's going way back in Bitcoin history.
This actually wound up getting the beginnings of R3's Corda of all things, which as much as I'm sure we can all hate on R3, their Corda technology is actually not bad, and for that use case, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, excellent. Thanks so much, Peter, for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Enjoy your treasure wallet.
Thank you.